Welcome to The Explainer. We've got an incredibly fascinating historical story lined up for you today. We're going to look closely at how a giant, triumphant military victory accidentally laid the absolute groundwork for a massive, empire-shaking rebellion. I mean, really think about it. Can winning a war actually spark a revolution? It seems totally backward, right? Usually when an empire wins a huge global conflict, they celebrate, people are thrilled, the empire gets stronger. But history loves throwing us curveballs. Today, we're going to see how winning a vast amount of territory actually made the British Empire way more vulnerable, triggered a massive financial panic, and completely enraged its own citizens. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the cost of victory, then drawing the Appalachian line. We'll look at whether it was protective or restrictive, talk about the ancient boundary stone, and wrap up with true morality. Section 1. The cost of victory. Okay, let's jump right in. The French and Indian War, which raged from 1754 to 1763, was an absolutely massive win for Britain. They scored incredible amounts of new land in North America, stretching all the way from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River. That is a staggering amount of real estate. But, well, here's the catch. Fighting a war across oceans, it costs an absolute fortune. And once you win all that land, you gotta defend it. Protecting settlers from Native American attacks across thousands of miles of wilderness took troops, supplies, and serious money. The victory was sweet, for sure, but the bill was due. And that bill was huge. The war was so unbelievably expensive that it literally doubled Britain's national debt. Just imagine a government's credit card maxing out and then somehow maxing out again. The British government was in full-blown financial panic. They were desperate for cash just to keep their vast empire afloat and to pay back everyone they borrowed from. Which brings us to the million-dollar question. Well, really the multi-million-pound question. Who pays for the defense? Imagine doing extra chores around the house for weeks, expecting a nice reward. But instead of a reward, you're told you actually have to pay out of your own pocket for the cleaning supplies you just used. That's kind of how the colonists felt. British leaders in London looked at this massive mountain of debt and decided, well, since the war protected the American colonies, the colonies need to step up and foot the bill. Section 2. Drawing the Appalachian line. Let's walk through exactly how this played out, because 1763 was literally a chaotic domino effect of a year. First, the war officially ends. Awesome, victory! But immediately, reality hits with this crushing, massive debt. Then, as eager colonists start packing up and moving westward into their newly won land, a major conflict breaks out called Pontiac's Rebellion. Native American tribes are fighting back against this colonial expansion. Now, Britain simply cannot afford another expensive war. So, to stop the fighting and save money right that second, they scramble to issue a brand new law before the year is even out, the Proclamation of 1763. So what exactly was this rushed law? The Proclamation of 1763 was a British law that banned colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. The goal was super simple: avoid conflict with Native Americans. British officials basically looked at a map, drew an invisible line straight down the mountain range, and said to the American colonists, "You cannot cross this line. You must stay on the east side." They just wanted to keep everyone completely separated to save money on defense. Section 3. Protective or restrictive. This single boundary line perfectly illustrates the massive disconnect between the two sides. Let's look at Britain's view. They thought this proclamation was highly protective, a total genius move. It keeps the peace with Native American tribes, and it saves a ton of money because they don't have to send troops out into the woods. But the colonists? They saw this exact same policy as incredibly restrictive. They felt totally betrayed. It completely ignored their sacrifices. Remember, a lot of these veterans had just bled and died to win that very land, and now they felt their freedom and economic futures were being locked away by leaders sitting comfortably across an ocean. And these totally different viewpoints planted the very first seeds of mistrust that would eventually grow into the American Revolution. The colonists, especially the veterans, felt entirely ignored. For many of them, this was their first major clash with British policy. They started noticing a really dangerous pattern. Britain was making rules for the entire empire from thousands of miles away, but those rules didn't match the local realities of the colonists at all. Suspicion started spreading like wildfire. Section 4. The ancient boundary stone. Let's change gears a bit and elevate this historical conflict into a timeless lesson on biblical morality. I absolutely love the wisdom in Proverbs 22:28. It says, do not move an ancient boundary stone set up by your ancestors. In biblical times, physical boundary stones marked property lines. Moving one was a huge offense because it meant stealing land and destroying peace. This verse shows us that boundaries really deeply matter. They require immense respect and wisdom. But here's the historical connection we need to make. While boundaries, like that proclamation line, are often created to protect peace, they are going to cause bitter, deep frustration if the people they affect feel completely ignored or treated unfairly. So, what does wise leadership actually look like when you're drawing lines and making rules? It really comes down to 4 steps. 1, seek peace. 2, respect agreements. 3, listen to those impacted. And 4, act with justice. This is exactly what the British leaders missed. True, wise leadership means listening to the people affected by your rules and acting with justice, not just making a selfish call to save a quick buck. Britain made this massive top-down decision without consulting the colonists at all, and it totally shattered their trust. I want you to really think about this vital reflection question in your own life. How can leaders create fair boundaries while still listening to the people affected by them? Whether we're talking about managing a huge global empire, leading a group project at school, or just setting rules in your own house, boundaries have real consequences. When you lead others, how do you make sure you're keeping the peace without completely ignoring the voices of the people you're leading? Section 5. True morality. Let's bring all this history and wisdom together into the core philosophy here at the Academy. Listen to this and really let it sink in. Education without morality will hurt. This is absolutely crucial to understand. Think about it. The British leaders in Parliament back in 1763. They were highly educated. They went to the absolute best, most elite universities in the world. But being smart just isn't enough. If supposedly educated people lack true biblical morality, they're going to keep making bad choices that hurt others. Sure, they might cleverly solve a short-term money problem with a line on a map, but they ended up starting a bloody revolution because they lacked the morality to treat people with basic justice and empathy. Now contrast that historical chaos with the incredible promise we find in Romans 8, 6-7. It promises true peace of mind to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. A spiritually anchored mind brings actual peace. That's a huge contrast to the chaos, the resentment, and the eventual rebellion caused by the Proclamation of 1763. When we align our learning and our leadership with godly wisdom, we experience that true peace. We avoid making those same selfish, destructive mistakes that end up tearing relationships and even whole nations apart. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to carry with you today. What's the point of being smart if you keep making choices that hurt? It's a profound concept, isn't it? Don't just settle for being educated. Strive to be wise. Always combine your education with God's truth as you continue your learning journey. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it opened your eyes, and I can't wait to see you for our next deep dive into history.